Hello. Thanks for coming back to the channel. So again, I'd like to just start off with the reminder that this is educational. And so because it's educational, it's good to have healthful skepticism and essential critical thinking. In other words, I've mentioned it in the past, thesis, antithesis, for the purpose of synthesis. So that'll be something that I'll endeavor repeating as just a healthful way to look into some of these things that I'll be talking about. Of course, we have also entered into the James 5 situation because I've called the older men repeatedly, and the steps of Matthew 18 have not been carried out correctly, and so these YouTube posts are the testimony at the city gates for all to see. So information can come in. The parties that were involved have been invited or been linked into these videos, so they are observed. Anyway, I thought today what we could do is we could talk about the subject of hazing, the hazing ritual. Now again, the governing body gave Gilead students one particular instruction. But within the culture of Jehovah's Witnesses, another dynamic is at play. It's almost like you've got a divided society. Now, is this seeded by the governing body or not? Or is it something that has arisen from within the culture? Well, I think it's very interesting that representatives of Watchtower Bible and Tract Society in the form of the Gilead umbrella, the training, the graduates that come through that teaching, that there would be a unit that is devoted to pointing out this particular watchtower. And the watchtower that I'm going to talk about, if you go to jw.org, in fairly recent times, it was taken down. You can find it on the wol.jw.org website, but you cannot find it on the jw.org website. And it happened coincidentally, providentially, when I wrote in a report using this reference, which was in a Gilead unit that came under governing body control. In other words, governing body, they want to have involvement in teaching the Gilead students or those that are involved in that program, that whole umbrella. And let me clarify something here, because it does get ambiguous again. Because at the time that I was involved in the Gilead program, it was called Ministerial Training School. And the justification for that was that they could take information, condense it and program in an accelerated format. There's another reason for that, but it gets to something that can offend many persons. the normal 5.5-month program involved women. So the justification, whether right or wrong, because this is done in closed doors, was that because the ministerial training school program was only men, they could condense it to 2.5 months. So it's the same information. They can provide missionary status, they can insert to circuit work or branch work, whatever, on the basis of that, because it's the same program, or it used to be the same program. Of course, that has changed. And now you've got other programs that have emerged from that. But at the time, it was under the Gilead umbrella. The proof of that is found in the JV book, known as the Proclaimer's book, which is the Jehovah's Witness modern history that is written to bring Jehovah's Witnesses up to speed about Jehovah's Witness history. So that is the publication that is there. It's kind of like an inoculation book. So if you go into the field ministry and you hear something about, let's say, a controversial thing, something like Rutherford and Bethsarim, well, a Gilead graduate would be inoculated against that, because in one of the units they would have seen, yes, that's exactly what happened. I'm not surprised by that. And here is the JV reference which talks about it, and this is the information available that we can present about it. So if it comes in a negative way, this would be the Gilead graduates' way to counter that argument or that negativity. So coming to the Watchtower reference that I want to talk about, that went missing from jw.org, but which appears still on the date of the 7th of August 2025, is the Watchtower 1980 4/1, January, February, March, April, 4/1, pages 12 to 15. That reference, Watchtower 1980, 4/1, and I'm going to be drawing attention to what happens when a person finds themselves in a hazing ritual or a hazing situation. So let's just define hazing. I'm going to type that into the computer and just get a definition. I'm just going to read it out. Hazing refers to any activity expected of someone in joining or participating in a group that humiliates, degrades, abuses, or endangers them. So I'm going to attach to that it is a ritual. Now this might sound fairly surprising, because your general Jehovah's Witness goes, no, I don't know what you are talking about. What are you referring to, Matt? Have you lost it again? You know, we thought you crazy, but now we are becoming more and more sure. So the reason why I'm going into this is because it's not for drama. I've emphasized this. It's for documentation. It's for light on this particular matter, because you're going to get young people put into a situation where they are expected to move ahead into positions of oversight in an accelerated way. That's what's happened. You even have almost, in my opinion, a generation that's been skipped from oversight. So a lot of, let's put it this way, if you go into service desk, you're going to see a lot of young faces. And there have been jokes, it's the 20-year-old that runs service desk now. In other words, a very obedient individual that follows a set of rules and a sequence or a flow chart, much like a helpline. So you phone in and you say, oh, my computer's broken, or my camera's broken, or my cell phone is working a bit strange. And the person says, right, well, we're going to put you through to the help desk and they're going to follow a sequence. Are you seeing this flashing light, or are you seeing this? And they just follow a flow chart as a sequence. But the actual thinking process is not necessarily engaged in a way that understands the principles. It's just following a sequence. It's following a flow chart. And so that's how you've got, of course, service desk isn't just made up of 20-year-olds. If you go there, you're going to find, no, Matt, we found different age groups and different age clusters there. But the point is that it is largely following a flow chart. So was it August? Of course, I'm reporting this August 7th, 2025, just as an anchor, because time is going to move on, isn't it? But here is the article, 1980, that quietly disappeared, and it says, beware of imputing wrong motives to others. So as we've established, it hasn't disappeared entirely. You can still find it quietly sitting in the Watchtower online library at wol.jw.org. Or if you, like me or others that value a hard copy and an authentic copy that you can refer to, then you can go and take a look in your 1980 bound volume, but also realize that that may have changed. So if you have the original Watchtower, that would be useful as well. But anyway, if you go to the volume, you'll find that the information is there. So let's look at what it actually says in a hazing situation. The article goes into great detail about condemning the dangerous spiritual habit of assigning bad motives to others without evidence. Now, the first time I came across this noticeably was in the year 2000, 25 years ago. Yeah, I may have noticed it, but I didn't mark it. But I marked it 25 years ago. So, the article says don't assign bad motives to others without tangible evidence. So it calls this unfounded suspicion. And it describes how counsel can be wrong. It even says this, and here's the quote. Obviously, it would be morally wrong to allow a lie to stand unchallenged. Again, quote, obviously it would be morally wrong to allow a lie to stand unchallenged. End quote. So yes, that's the Watchtower itself that said that in print. That is the same instruction that is given to Gilead students who graduate. Of course, we realize that programs are rewritten, so you have to take a look at which Gilead program was doing this. Now, I want to talk briefly about a pattern many brothers, elders, servants, pioneers have noticed. I don't want to exclude sisters. Sisters have their own traps to deal with, but it's all interconnected. But I'm specifically going into the male side. Elders, brothers, servants, pioneers, they've noticed this, they've reported this. And it's specifically what is an initiation trap. So you get a visit, and maybe it's a circuit overseer. Hi, Matt, want to meet with you, talk with you, or work with you in field service or something, or whatever. And maybe you get a letter from the branch based upon one of his reports. And I have these letters. So you get told that there's a concern, a loving concern about your attitude. It could be all sorts of things, very personal. It could say that it is based upon a personal qualifications report. And you go, well, what's that? Or you go, hang on. If that's like a psychometric evaluation, shouldn't that have been discussed with me on a one-to-one, transparently? Shouldn't I know who has done the report? So you get the letter, and the letter doesn't necessarily tell you who's done the report. In the letter, or the visit from a circuit overseer or somebody in oversight, it could be a branch committee member, it could be service desk called you in, or a couple of elders. That's another one. Here's the trap. The accusation is vague, or it's outright false, or it's twisted out of context. Right? How does it work? What is the trap? If you accept the false charge with a smile, thank you, brother, for the counsel. I'll work on it. You pass the test. Bing! You get a tick. If you sit there and you recall the Watchtower 1980, which I quoted at the outset, and you say, thank you very much for that. May I inquire where the source of this report came from? That's a problem. Just that in itself is a problem. Even if you said, thank you very much for your counsel, thank you very much for this, may I inquire what the source is or where the report came from? Or even worse, if you say, well, that's not true, then suddenly you are labeled as proud or resistant or a problem. Now, I need to be very clear. There are two types of humility here. There is a genuine humility, and there is a humility that is what I call a pseudo humility. It's sycophantic in nature. But that's my label. The correct label, I believe, and again, I'm open to correction, is it is called grooming. So the 1980 Watchtower agrees with me, or rather, I agree with it. So why was it removed? Why was this careful, balanced counsel quietly erased from jw.org, but yet kept alive on the secondary site, hidden from the average, I want to say member, let's say associate, and member? Perhaps, sorry for this weasel word, perhaps because it exposes too much. Again, I ask for counter evidence. Because it tells you that you're not required to let lies stand. In fact, it's actually giving you another one of these double bind situations, another one of these catch-22 situations where you're saying, oh yeah, I need to deal with this because it's a lie. What else do you say? The 1980 Watchtower says, you're not required to let lies stand. In fact, it's even indicating that you have moral fortitude if you tackle it in a spiritual way, respectfully. I know in the Gilead lecture that is what the students were taught. So it tells you that some counsel is incorrect, even if it's given with good intentions. And it eliminates this idea that any counsel that comes, right or wrong, has counselor immunity. And again, this is something I got on record, because I knew it was coming. And so the individual that was doing this actually spelled it out. They said, oh, by the way, it is our right to do this. And you must just accept it. The exact words stand in the record. So I'm pulling from memory. All right. So to challenge that, we now have to go to the record of what actually happened. But I kept that one squirreled away and believe that is a great transcript of what happens. Because we now have a situation where we can actually see this is an example of what occurs. So, the 1980 Watchtower tells us that even Jesus, even Paul, had their motives slandered, or if it's written, it's called libel, and that we must not imitate Satan, who imputes wrong motives to God's servants day and night. Because again, it's a legal thing. If you don't rebut it, it can be taken as true. But I'm going to say that you might be in a situation of severe coercion and, let's say, even stressed to a tremendous degree that you're just going, yes, 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 I just need to get through this thing. Yes, I agree. Yeah, sure, I agree. So you may slip into that. Or instead of saying, oh, I understand, I comprehend, but it gets picked up and they realize you're resistant. So again, friends, I say this with no hate. I say this with being solution-oriented and with, I hope, a deep clarity. If counsel is based on a lie, it's not counsel. It is a test of willingness to violate conscience. And this is the key programming element. 1980 Watchtower says, we're never told to do that. The article concludes by pointing to a future under God's kingdom or kingdom rule, messianic rule, where no one will need to suspect their brother or test his loyalty with slander. So let's get my words mixed up. I want to say we should be beginning to build that world now. That's what we should be doing. So just to recap what this is all about again. This is about hazing. It is about a test. It is about a trap which is rewarding submissiveness. That is what it's doing. So when we observe these patterns or false counsel as a compliance test, it's an exaggeration, it's libelous, or it's just close to your behavioral pattern and crosses over. It's introduced by a brother. It's sometimes vague, it's sometimes specific, It's delivered by an authority figure or a fellow elder, circuit overseer, branch liaison, and often framed as loving counsel or feedback. We're just advising you. But the target is expected to accept that information without resistance. That is what they are looking for. They want to say, well, it's just good advice, put it in your bag. But what they exclude from that is that lie is forwarded on, and it becomes a mark in your record that doesn't go away. They never let you forget it. And I've got that on record too. I've got it on record that a situation like that happened and replicated. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, 10, 12, 13, up to 25 years later, the same thing is replicating. Now, I had an elderly person contact me today. They lived their whole life with this. It destroyed their mental health. And finally, they exposed it. And when it was exposed, the persons who had seeded it then did this exaggerated, crying out for forgiveness, crying, getting down on their knees. I mean, it was over-demonstrated. Oh, please forgive us. We are sinful. We make mistakes. And you talk about cringe. This was cringe. Because I want to suggest, again, right or wrong, this was just performative. It wasn't genuine. It was because they were caught. They hadn't been caught. If the person hadn't pursued it, and I mean not just 20 years, 30, 40, their lifetime with us, which hurt them, hurt their families, or just created misery. So this person reached out to me today. The pain that came from it. So they were supposed to just accept it without any resistance and say, thank you very much, again, again, again. And be stuck in this purgatory, for want of a better description. Frozen in time, I believe the saying goes. So let's be clear. The hazing is, for this formula, pushback equals pride. Acceptance equals humility. Their definition of humility. Not the Watchtower 1980s version. So the catch is, truth is not the concern. Truth is not the concern. Obedience, compliance, and the ability to override your natural sense. That is what is on test. So this is the initiation rite. When this is broken in a person, please imagine what that does psychologically. Please imagine what that does spiritually. And please imagine what that spiritual situation then does in a behavioral pattern when it comes to criminal behavior. I'm not joking. I think if you have locked onto these videos, you are knowing I am not joking about this. So why am I harping on about it at the city gates in this judicial or elders committee or public tribunal, whatever you want to call it. Why am I going on about this? Because this is a dangerous establishment of psychological subordination. So by accepting lies as correction, a man, we haven't gone on to how this happens with women, but a man demonstrates willingness to gaslight himself. It's a precursor to complicity. It puts the person into that special club. So it's a soft form of public hazing masked as loving help. That's the cloak. So it rewards submissiveness. So if the target agrees, they're seen as mature, cooperative, they maintain privileges. If they question it, they're often accused or being, oh, this person is argumentative, this person is prideful, or this person is mentally independent. We don't like that. No, that's, the world. That's satanic. Got us into trouble in Eden. So I want to just say, is this reported in our internet age, in our information age? Yes. Many former elders, ministerial servants, pioneers have shared this in forums, documentaries, and those things are shut down invariably. It's like, oh, what are you doing on a forum? No, you can't get onto a forum. But now let me say, what about a legal affidavit? Yeah. Those things are there, and they're showing that accepting false counsel became a rite of passage. So we have these documents. Here we go, affidavit, under oath. So those who challenged it were isolated or removed. And this is why, again, the two-witness rule. What do you do if you're not trained in transcribing or recording it or putting a memo and saying this is what happened, and you start locking down the event? Brother, I'm sorry, I'm going to mention this. You know who you are. One of the anointed is sitting in a chair during an elders' meeting. Another elder comes up to him and yanks on his hair, pulls it. Now, I can't tell you what was exactly said, but try and imagine something like, is this your real hair? Ding, 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 ding. But the reason for that was to show that they are so emboldened that they're trying to come into their personal space and show a superiority and get away with it. And you've got other elders supporting it. Be quietly. Because they're saying, no, we don't necessarily believe you're really anointed. We're there to test you. And they make it a living hell for these people. My experience here in this congregation, we had 4 anointed. I'm not going to say professed anointed. I'm not going to say partakers. I'm going to say 4 genuine anointed people. And I look at the records and I go, this one's sick. This one's struggling. Sick. And I'm going, okay, let me compare to other congregations I've served in. Oh, here we've got an sick. And in my analysis, I see psychospiritual sickness, because when you work with these people, whoa, they flourish. You give them a chance, flourish. Wow, this is great. You know, you're validating my experience, all of this kind of thing. I had one of these anointed persons working, one of them was working incredibly hard, shepherding, out in the ministry, ticking all the boxes. When it came to now the review for qualifications, at this stage they were a ministerial servant. The circuit overseer says, yeah, but he's not seen in the ministry. So I put up my, Matt puts up his hand. Yeah, I know he's in the ministry. It's one of our most productive brothers. Brothers, who agrees with that? No one puts up their hand. I'm going to tell you why that happened. Because these brothers were not shepherding. They weren't working with him in the field ministry. They were all off on holiday. I'm going to say playing golf again. Or, oh, I'm working so hard for the branch. I've got so much to do for the branch. Yeah, you're not the only one who's working hard for the branch. But, on to you, pal. I know what you're doing for the branch. And you're going around with a trumpet. I'm working so hard for the branch as a shield. See it? And you know I see it. So, in that same elders meeting, the circuit overseer says, in a very clever way, what is their psychological outlook like? And they say it with the right kind of words that it goes, oh, I remember an article that somebody who says they're of the anointed, they have mental problems. They have pride. Not, oh, you are legitimate. So the weight of the thoughts are against the individual. So you can say, oh, well, that may be a necessary test. Let's test these ones. I think I've painted how this is a spiritually abusive environment already, just with these factors that have come into play. So we've spoken about the anointed here, or I've woven that in. Because, yes, statistically, have we exceeded the 144,000 mark? Didn't that happen in 1935? Is it ambiguous? Do we know for sure? Well, Frederick Franz was talking about replacements in 1980, and it was really tight back in those days. Then, of course, we have this crossover generation, which I explained with you about David Splain and tribe of Benjamin, Joseph, the younger brothers, the contemporaries. And then later on, there was that video with the crossover that was explaining the generation, and how that extended the time frame from 1914, 1919, all of that kind of thing. So I don't believe that that's a big deviation from this hazing ritual. Many have reported it. In Australia's Royal Commission, testimony suggested that reports were fabricated or withheld, depending on whether someone was seen as loyal or a threat. So we're glad that that came out. So some ex-elders have used the exact language as we've discussed here. Yes, I was tested to see if I'd thank them for a lie. Now, I might have done that. I'm not sure. I know I wouldn't have used a word like I understand. I would have used a word like I comprehend. If somebody says, do you understand me? I would say, I comprehend what you're saying. And I would just attempt to find a way out of that meeting and then and have it all jotted down and all of this. During the meeting, I would say, oh, by the way, I'm writing these notes down because what you're saying to me, I feel it's so important. That would be my way of dealing with it. And then I'd send it back and say, tell me, is there anything you'd like to correct in this memo? let me know by the end of the week. Thank you very much. So, I'm going to work on it. And they would say, yes, would you work on it? In my mind, I go, I'm going to work on it. In other words, I'm going to really work on it, but not necessarily in the way you think I'm going to work on it. I'm going to work on it we got to stop the spiritual abuse. I'm going to apply Watchtower 1980. So yes, some elders now, they say, yeah, I was tested to see if I'd thank them for the lie. And guess where these ones get inserted? So this behavior, is it antichrist in spirit? Antichristic in spirit? In my opinion, I say yes. You can decide for yourself. Obviously. Christ confronted falsehood in religious power. He didn't demand blind obedience from people to men, especially when truth was trampled. So there's Jesus Christ, and he's resisting this. So if you want a scripture, how about Isaiah 5, verse 20? So that talks about this reversal situation. Woe to those who say good is bad, bad is good, or call evil good and good evil. So what we're describing here is systemic abuse of authority again. It's a cognitive obedience trap. This is creating a lot of the mental health problems, I suggest. Correct me. It's a form of spiritual grooming and conditioning. I'm speaking of brothers here, to prefer institutional approval over ethical truth. Women are not exempt. They have extraordinary challenges, and we must dignify and respect women. I am just focused here today, if you can bear with me, as imperfectly as I am presenting this, as the grooming situation for those that are put into positions of oversight. So I hope in this, if you want to say documentation, this video presentation, that we've identified the trap. If not, please tell me otherwise. So we don't thank persons for the lie. As far as we comprehend, Jesus said to the Samaritan woman, Jehovah or God is looking for those that worship him in spirit and in truth. But when we don't do that, we break the ritual. Or hang on, when we, you see my mind. When there is a trap and we don't comply, that is breaking the ritual. So we don't get a tick, we don't get a pass. And that makes the person who rejects the ritual considered dangerous. Because they're saying, well, how can we put you into secrets and, the deeper things here if, your conscience isn't aligned with us? Your conscience is not conforming. It's above conformity. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. Thank you very much for persevering with me. I hope that helps somebody. Beware of hazing. That article, Watchtower 1980, 4-1, pages 12 to 15. Beware of imputing wrong motives to us. I want to thank my friends. I want to thank my family. And I want to thank you. You are the reason I am here.